my name is Caroline Hoden. I'm an EU policy researcher at Voco Europe. On today's Monday Talk podcast, we'll discuss the cooperation of Georgia with the European Union in defense and security policy, and we'll explore ways the EU can build a closer cooperation with the country in this policy area and in the face of growing Russian aggression as well. We are honored to be joined by His Excellency Ambassador Pawel Herczynski, Head of the EU Delegation to Georgia. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
The pleasure is all mine. Caroline, thank you very much. And I'm all at your disposal.
Super. So with Ukraine and Moldova, Georgia is amongst the 3 associated Eastern Partnership countries which are most closely aligned with the EU. Georgia has declared its commitment to participate in EU missions and cooperate in several areas such as cybersecurity. Therefore, my first question is, considering the current provisions for cooperation between the EU and Georgia in defense and security policy, which area do you think necessitates the most progress at the moment?
I'm glad that you mentioned a very close cooperation between Georgia and European Union. Since 2014, Georgia is an associated country together with Ukraine and Moldova. Association agreement is a very solid basis of our bilateral relationships, EU-Georgia relationships. Georgia has committed in this association agreement to deliver on many fronts. The process is ongoing. On top of it, we also have a free trade agreement with Georgia. We call it DCFTA. And what is extremely important, especially for Georgian citizens, we also have a visa-free regime. So Georgians are free to travel to Europe for a certain period of time without necessity to obtain visas. So this has been a very solid basis for our bilateral cooperation. And things have accelerated even further this year because June this year, our leaders have decided to grant Georgia European perspective. What does it mean? That for the first time, our internal differences among 27 member states about how to enlarge, if to enlarge at all, and how to enlarge have been put aside. And Georgia is formally recognized to have European perspective and will progress on the path towards European integration through different steps. The next step is so-called candidate status that should be granted to Georgia next year, provided certain conditions are met. So now we are very busy here in the EU delegation, assisting Georgians on delivering on the 12 priorities that were identified by the European Commission. Security and defense cooperation has been always extremely good with Georgia. Georgia is one of the EU partner countries with an agreement to participate in our missions and operations. And this cooperation has been a two-way street. So on one hand, we are present in Georgia with our civilian mission since 2008, EU monitoring mission in Georgia, which is, by the way, the only international presence monitoring the administrative borderline between Georgia proper and the 2 breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The mission was celebrating its 14th birthday very recently, and this is a mission very widely supported by all member states. On the other hand, Georgians are participating in our CSDP missions and operations. And they have been doing so for many, many years. They are present in Central African Republic. They are present in Mali. And from what we are told consistently, they are planning to continue their participation in our CSDP missions and operations. On top of it, there is a new initiative that we have rolled out last year, European Peace Facility, and Georgia is one of the beneficiaries of the European Peace Facility. We can go into more details if you wish. And of course, we have a network of different work strengths together with Georgia, including cyber, including hybrid, where again it's a two-way street because Georgia has its own experiences that are beneficial to us, and of course we are moving fast forward on those issues among 27 member states and with our close partners. So the cooperation between EU and Georgia in general is based on very solid grounds. It has accelerated immensely in the couple of last months after the start of the Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And when it comes to security and defense, we are very close partners working together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your very complete answer. I would like to, since you mentioned the European Peace Facility, I will start with that and we can go into more detail. So in October 2022, the EU launched an EU military assistance mission in order to enhance the military capability of Ukraine to conduct military operations effectively and to effectively defend itself against Russian aggression. And this new mission takes place under the framework of the European Peace Facility. And I would like to ask you whether you would see a possibility in the future for a similar mission to be launched in the country. And is the European Peace Facility a good model to better equip Georgia's military in the future?
Look, thank you for the question. I think I should unpack the questions because you have put many elements into the question. So first, when it comes to Ukraine, and here I need to be careful because in my previous position, I was in the headquarters in Brussels, and as a managing director for CSDP, I was responsible for security and defense. But this has abruptly stopped September 1st, and I arrived here in Tbilisi as EU ambassador. So I might not have the latest when it comes to the development of CSDP. But basically, when it comes to Ukraine, we used to have and will have a civilian mission, EUMM Ukraine, that is focusing on security sector reform. And this mission it has headquarters in Kiev and some field offices. We used to have many more. Now, gradually, we are trying to go back to the regions. Odessa field office has been opened. I think that colleagues are also working on the reopening of Kharkiv field office. Independently from this civilian CSDP mission in Ukraine, focusing on security sector reform, member states are in the process of discussing to launch another mission, this time military mission, to train Ukrainian armed forces on the territory of EU member states, mostly Poland. The discussions are ongoing. I understand that the consensus has been reached, and very shortly we will actually launch that mission. So it's not like the military mission will replace the civilian mission. Civilian mission stays, and additionally, there will be a military training mission to train up to 15,000 Ukrainian personnel, initially at least on the territory of EU member states, foremost Poland. Now, when it comes to Georgia, the context is completely different. We have our civilian CSDP mission since 2008. So immediately after the 2008 war, there was an EU-brokered ceasefire, 6-point plan, and one of the points agreed was the establishment of this mission. And the main objective of the mission is to monitor the administrative borderline between Georgia and the two breakaway regions of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. European Peace Facility is a completely separate initiative that we have launched last year. The initiative was focused initially on equipping the military forces of partner countries that we train. We have several training missions. I just mentioned the Ukrainian one, which is in the pipeline. But before that, actually all our military training missions were in Africa. And it was Central African Republic, Mali, Somalia, and Mozambique. So the idea was, initial idea was to equip the armed forces of those partner countries that we train. Because, we were putting a very heavy investment in training, but we were not, it was impossible for us also to equip those armed forces that we have trained. There were others who were doing this. We were losing the leverage, and our investment was actually quite questionable because others had a huge leverage upon the troops that we have been training. During the discussions, the idea was extended to go beyond the equipping of armed forces of partner countries that we train. And the idea was for the EPF, for the European Peace Facility, to have a global reach. And this is why, since the very beginning, very modestly, we have put some projects for Eastern partners. So it was Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, as well as for partners in Western Balkans. Things have changed dramatically because of the war. And European Peace Facility has been very swiftly adjusted in order to finance EU military support to Ukraine. First and foremost, lethal assistance, but also non-lethal assistance. And member states, every couple of weeks, have been taken another decision of another tranche, usually 500 million euro, in order to finance delivery of military assistance to Ukraine. And this continues and will continue. So this is just a broader picture. Your question, member states decided in the framework of our comprehensive support to Ukraine, which is diplomatic, political, economic, financial, and military, all fronts, also to establish a EU military training mission. I don't know what is the latest from Brussels, but I understand that very shortly the mission will start. Part of the common costs are financed also through European Peace Facility. European Peace Facility, the main pillar is equipment for the military forces, but also there is a second pillar of the European Peace Facility, so-called previously Athena mechanism. These are details. And this is about financing common costs of CSDP missions and operations. So it's true that part of this future military training mission in Ukraine will be financed through European Peace Facility. In case of Georgia, we have a civilian mission, not a military mission, civilian mission, monitoring mission. And for the moment, there are no discussions about launching a military mission in Georgia. I don't think there is any interest on part of the Georgians, at least so far. And I don't think there is also any need felt on part of our member states. And final sentence, any decision on launching a new mission, be it civilian or military, requires unanimity by 27 member states. And sometimes the process is quite lengthy and quite complicated. So for the moment, we continue with our civilian CSDP mission in Georgia, which is the only international presence at the administrative borderline between Georgia and the two breakaway regions, and there is no discussion of any military training mission on the table.
Great, thank you very much. I would like to go off of the presence of the EU monitoring mission in Georgia. Do you think are there other confidence building measures that you could implement in the areas near the Abkhazian and South Ossetian administrative boundary lines? What more could you do to prevent the renewal of instability in the region?
Well, we are doing a lot, and we mentioned several times the EUMM, the EU monitoring mission. 14 years of presence, and I am representing the EU delegation. I'm the EU ambassador in Georgia, but in the same building, a couple of floors below, the headquarters of the EUMM, and of course we work very closely with our colleagues. There is a head of mission, my compatriot Marek Szczygieł, who is in charge of the missions for the last 3 years, and I know that they are doing really good job. And the signals that we are getting from the Georgian side is high appreciation for the presence and the work of the mission. But this is not the only element of EU contribution to the peace building and conflict resolution in Georgia. European Union is also one of the co-chairs of so-called Geneva International Discussions. This is a format that has been created after the 2008 war. The meetings are held on regular basis. Before the war, the meetings were held on regular basis, involving also representatives from Russian Federation. There was a longer break, but colleagues have met again in Geneva late October. They have reconvened. And this is the place where international community, including the EU, is trying to find a long-term solution to those two frozen conflicts. It's not easy. It's extremely difficult. But we are, of course, heavily engaged in a long-term resolution. Maybe one additional point, which is a very new element, is that we are also using the assets of the EUMM Georgia, so of the EU civilian monitoring mission in Georgia, in order to establish presence in Armenia. There was an agreement between the sides to allow European Union monitors, and we have a small EU monitoring capability operating for the limited period of 2 months on the territory of Armenia in order to monitor eventual ceasefire violations. Highly appreciated by Armenia, and member states will very shortly decide what to do with this monitoring capability after the deadline of 2 months passes. And this is also a very important contribution of Georgia to the regional stability, because Georgians have accepted that a small number of monitors will be moved from Georgia temporarily to Armenia in order to help make sure that there is peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Right. This is very interesting. Thank you for talking a little bit about Armenia. I think this is really important. Now I would like to completely move this aside and talk a little about Georgia's participation in potential participation in PESCO projects. As a result of a 2020 Council decision, third countries are now permitted to participate in PESCO projects. And Georgia expressed its interest in participating and stated it wished to achieve this by 2026. What benefits would bring Georgia's participation in PESCO projects, and in which domain or future project do you think is Georgia most likely to get involved in?
Yeah, many thanks. As you know, in last couple of years, we have launched many different initiatives within the European Union framework on security and defense. One of them, I would say the key one, is PESCO. At the moment, there are around 50 different PESCO projects. These are member states who get together under a leadership of one particular member state and decide to cooperate closer with each other on particular issues. The possibility to participate in PESCO projects has been opened to third countries. It was not an easy discussion. Member states have discussed it over a long period, and we already have first third countries that were accepted to join PESCO. This is especially United States, Canada, and Norway that have joined PESCO military mobility project. And since I left Brussels, I understand also that the UK has joined under certain conditions, and these conditions are crystal clear in the Council decision establishing PESCO. Third countries can apply. There is a procedure, and this is for Georgia to decide. I'm, of course, as a EU ambassador to Georgia, I'm in contact with my Georgian counterparts, and one of them is the Minister of Defense. I know that there is a lot of interest. They have identified several PESCO projects, cyber, special forces, military mobility, medical command, and many others. And it's for them to decide and follow the procedure.
Okay. Now my last question. You've mentioned cybersecurity, so I'm just going to finish with this. During the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia, the country was regularly the target of cyber attacks and campaigns of disinformation from Russia. Is Georgia today better prepared to resist such attacks? And how can the EU help Georgia further strengthen its resilience?
I noticed I mentioned several times that EU-Georgia cooperation on security and defense is a two-way street, because in fact, Georgia also has a lot to contribute. They do it with their participation in our CSDP missions and operations. But of course, they have also a lot of expertise on cyber issues, because as you have rightfully mentioned, they are under constant cyber attack, as by the way now nearly all of us in Europe. I think that they are far better prepared, of course. Also, the awareness is completely in a different place, and clearly it's also in our interest, in the EU interest, to cooperate with them very closely. Some of the EPF, European Peace Facility finances, will also go into that direction. We do not have a formal cyber dialogue with Georgia. We have just established one with Ukraine last year. But clearly there are a lot of contacts, and cyber security issues are raised during security and defense dialogue or security dialogue that we have with Georgians on the regular basis. So when it comes to cooperating with European Union, Georgia is one of our closest partners. Now, since the June European Council decision to grant Georgia European perspective, Georgia is also on the path towards European integration. So it's only a one-way street, more and more cooperation. And of course, Georgia, with its location, with its experience, is a very interesting partner for the European Union when it comes to security and defense. And I give you another example, which is not related to the European Union itself, but to NATO. And it's not a widely known fact, but I think it's extremely interesting that Georgia was the biggest contributor to NATO mission in Afghanistan, biggest non-NATO ally. and throughout all years of NATO engagement in Afghanistan, there were over 10,000 Georgian troops who have been along NATO in Afghanistan. So we are talking about really small but very serious partner when it comes to security and defense.
All right. Well, thank you. This is unfortunately the end of the interview. Thank you very much for sharing all your insights into this very important topic. And I hope to see much more cooperation between the EU and Georgia in the future. All right. Thank you very much for being our guest this afternoon, and I wish you a lovely day. Thank you.